We are back talking about coverage of anti-abortion legislation, and this reader letter to the New York Times says it best. The headline here, I don't even know how to talk to the other side about this. Well, today, the three biggest papers in the state of Alabama are banding together to put this on the front page. You'll see this is the same front page in all the papers. The editor telling me that what they've done is they've elevated women's voices in Alabama because they feel the debate in the legislature was so male-dominated. So the voices of 200 women in Alabama on the cover of the big papers there. Let me bring Irin and Jane back here with me from our panel earlier. Irin, how would you size up the coverage in the past week of these bills? And you know, we're talking about this as if it's happening suddenly, but this has been a slow motion story that's picking up steam lately.
Yeah, so I have been covering the debate, the political and the grassroots and the access questions around abortion for the better part of a decade. And it's obvious that the last 2 weeks people have started paying attention to it. I think it's a tricky story to cover accurately for anybody because these are the stated intents of these laws are to ban abortion in 100% at all times, but in the short term, they're not going to go into effect. And so I think that there's a tension between showing the true impact of the laws, which would be to cut off abortion access entirely, and to show that the short-term reality that it's not going to happen. So you actually had a lot of abortion providers talking about how their patients are calling them and they're so worried that they have to cancel their appointments. So as journalists, obviously, we don't want to spread misinformation, but we also want people to know what the stakes are, too.
Yeah. There was a headline from BuzzFeed that we can put on screen trying to track misinformation that's spreading about abortion. What is perhaps the biggest point of misinformation that's out there? Is it that these bills are not actually going into effect
there's a few things. One, I think a point of misinformation is even when we use phrases like the abortion divide, it implies that there's a 50-50 situation. You cited in your previous segment, in fact, a majority of the country supports legal access to abortion in every single poll. If you put aside fuzzy words like pro-life and pro-choice, which are sort of 50-50, but people don't define the terms, you actually have a majority of Americans supporting Roe v. Wade, supporting access to legal abortion, not wanting to see it. You can slice and dice it any way you want, but that's the fact that comes out. What you do have instead is a very engaged minority.
Is this asymmetric intensity? Yes. Asymmetric intensity, the idea that one side is much more passionate and intense about an issue than the other side?
So I know many very intense abortion rights activists. Right. However, it is the case that in states like Alabama and Georgia and Missouri, the political process has been such that people have taken over their local parties, they have been in the grassroots, they've been running crisis pregnancy centers, they have been creating their own media like Catherine. So you have a political process that doesn't reflect public opinion, and that is in part a function of the fact that anti-abortion voters, and by the way, they're also anti-contraception in many cases, are voting on this. The other piece of misinformation I think that happens is that a lot of these laws have misinformation embedded within them, and I think that as journalists we should be really careful. For example, even fetal heartbeat. What your doctors will tell you that at 6 weeks there is no heart. There is in fact electric pulse that sounds like a heartbeat. There are laws that make claims that abortion causes cancer, which have been disproved by every single medical establishment. So again, or that a fetus can feel pain at 20 weeks. These are all completely disproven facts. So I think as journalists, when we're reporting on them, we have to make it really clear that these are political claims and not factual or medical ones.
Right, not factual claims. Jane, you wrote for Vox about how even some conservatives think that this Alabama law has gone too far, and that's going to be a big storyline going forward.
Well, I think that it is, I think we need to separate going too far morally and going too far strategically. Because you're hearing from a lot of conservatives, and there are a number of conservatives who support abortion rights, and I think you've heard from a couple of them this week. But, I would say the vast majority think of themselves as opposing abortion. And so for both Alabama, Georgia, Missouri, the support that that's gotten has been largely on the basis of believing that these bills are morally correct. I've heard the example, though, I think Ben Shapiro, the conservative pundit, used the example of talking about the abolition of slavery and saying that, not everyone can be William Lloyd Garrison going as hard against what, these groups or people believe to be the evil of abortion, when you actually need to think about the strategic elements. For example, there are concerns that with the Alabama bill, with the lack of exceptions with regard to rape and incest, and also for how the lawmakers behind the bill talked about it. For example, when someone raised the point of what would happen to a fertilized egg at a fertility clinic, and the response was, well, that doesn't count. It's not a woman. She's not pregnant. Which the response being like, oh, this is starting
it's about targeting women.
This is, yeah, it starts to look, even if you are a pro-life voter, it starts to look like this has less to do with protecting life and more to do with targeting women who might be wanting to, take care of their own bodies. But I think that how that this issue, it's really important to, and I've been explaining, my spouse is from outside the United States, and where this issue is not as big a deal, but I've been trying to explain that this has been a near 40-year debate that we've been having in the United States, and especially pro-life voters having conversations with each other. You heard that during kind of the partial birth abortion controversy, and you've heard that since. But there are some conservatives who are concerned that even if this is morally correct, it's strategically a bad idea, especially if you're hoping to get it before the Supreme Court.
Right.